Picture this. You're a trained warrior. You've been fighting since you were a child. You're highly trained with a weapon. You have armor, a shield, and years of battlefield experience. And then, one bad morning, you wake up on the ground, your arms bound, being dragged by an enemy warrior. Yes, you've been captured. Now, in most civilizations, this is terrible. I mean, objectively, maybe you become a slave, maybe you rot in a dungeon, or maybe you're ransomed home. But this isn't most civilizations. This is the Aztec Empire. And what's about to happen to you is simultaneously the most horrifying, the most bizarre, and, if you look at it in a certain way, the most meaningful death a person could have. To comprehend what's coming, you need to understand one thing. The Aztecs believed the universe was about to collapse. All the time, every single day, each second. According to their foundational myth, the story of the five suns, the current world is not the first. The world was created and destroyed 4 times before our world came to be. The first world was destroyed when jaguars devoured all of humanity. The second world was destroyed by hurricanes, but this time with a twist. The survivors became monkeys. The third world was destroyed by a huge fire. Survivors now became the birds. The last world before ours came to an end because of a great flood. Survivors this time became fish. And now we have arrived to our world, the fifth one. Here, in order for the world to keep existing, the sun needs blood to keep shining. The best source for this blood? The heart. And not just any heart. The heart of a brave soul. The heart of someone vibrant, strong, and completely full of life. The heart of, I guess you guessed it by now, of a captured warrior. Yes, I think you got it. That's where you come in. Around 1450, a catastrophic drought and famine hit central Mexico. The Aztec priesthood looked at the dying crops and said, "The gods are starving. We need more sacrifices. A lot more." Their solution: formalize a system of scheduled battles with their rivals. Battles fought not to kill each other, but to capture each other. They called this the Flower Wars. Why flower, you may ask? They refer to the warriors themselves as flowers. Their lives are plucked out to keep the gods satisfied. As I said, these wars were like organized, pre-arranged operations. The goal on the battlefield was not to kill, since a dead enemy was a wasted resource. They needed the enemy alive. Every Aztec warrior had to develop an incredibly precise fighting style. They'd use the flat, heavy wooden side of the weapon to deliver multiple blows to the skull and bringing you down. Once on the ground, probably disoriented, bleeding but alive. They'd grab you by the top knot on your head. That was the universal symbol of defeat. As you were lying on the ground, your captor looked you in the eyes and said, "He is my beloved son." Game over. Your fate was now sealed. This exchange was a genuine, meaningful event, a complex spiritual and social bond. Look, you weren't just his prisoner anymore. You were an offering he would give to the gods in his own name. From this moment on, your captor was legally and spiritually responsible for your well-being. He was your father, and you were on your way back to Tenochtitlan. This journey was a challenge. You weren't the only captive. There might be dozens, sometimes hundreds of you. When you arrived in Tenochtitlan, you were paraded through the city. The capital was enormous, home to hundreds of thousands of people, bigger than any city in Europe at the time. And then you were taken to the Eagle's house. Forget any dungeon you're imagining. The Eagle's house was a specialized compound, large wooden cage structures heavily guarded by veterans. It doubled as a council chamber for the highest-ranking military generals. At night, you were locked in, with no illusions to escape. But during the day, well, the day was something else. Let's put it that way. Your time in captivity could last anywhere from a few days to several months. On one hand, let's face it, you were a prisoner awaiting execution. On the other hand, though, you were being treated like an honored house guest. Look, let's start with the food. Your captor, your beloved father, was personally required to feed you. A sickly, skinny offering was an insult to the gods. Their hygiene was equally good. The Aztecs bathed twice a day as a cultural standard. Therefore, you were washed as well. You weren't kept in a cell all day. You were integrated into everyday life. You were brought to the great market, the biggest marketplace in the known world. You danced and sang sacred songs. The Spanish conquistadores recorded seeing men who were days from their sacrificial stone, laughing, dancing, greeting citizens. How? How does a person do that? Well, we need to look at the Aztec system of ritual immersion, which was essentially a terror management machine, a narrative where death was not punishment but ascension. And as the day of the festival approached, the daily routine shifted entirely toward preparation. Priests began dressing you in the ceremonial clothes and robes, white chalk painted onto your skin. You no longer looked like a prisoner. You looked like you were already halfway to the heavens. Now, for most captives, this was it. Then came the blood sacrifice, but for a very selected few, something completely different happened. Say you were one of the chosen ones, and you are a living god. The selection criteria were intense though. You had to be physically flawless, and if you were chosen, the wooden cage disappeared from your time there. Instead, you could wander the streets of Tenochtitlan freely. You could even smoke tobacco. Wherever you walked, the citizens fell to their knees. As I said, you were a living god. The emperor himself bowed before you. For 20 days before your scheduled sacrifice, 4 beautiful young women became your wives. You feasted, you danced, you lived in absolute luxury. For some high-ranking prisoners, there was one last option, the gladiatorial combat. You were handed a weapon, except the edges weren't obsidian. They were lined with feathers, decorative and useless. You basically stood no chance, let's face it. Then 4 or 5 fully armed eagle and jaguar warriors came at you one by one, this time with real weapons. It was a theater designed to end in your defeat. But there was a rule, defeat them all and you go free. Well, theoretically this might have been an option. Historical accounts, though, suggest this essentially never happened. Yep, exactly 0 times. When you finally fell, the priests were already moving you to your end. At the Templo Mayor, the great pyramid at the heart of Tenochtitlan. The sensory experience was overwhelming. Thundering wooden drums, conch shells screaming across the city. Clouds of copal incense so thick they blurred the sky. The chanting of hundreds of priests. You were even climbing the temple stairs voluntarily. They bent you over a sacrificial stone designed to arch the chest upward. 5 priests held you, arms, legs, head. The 6th, the high priest, painted entirely in black, held a flint knife called the Tecpatl. The heart, still beating, was raised to the sun. At the base, priests took the head. The skull was cleaned, pierced, and mounted on to the great skull rack. Recent archaeology near the Templo Mayor has uncovered towers of over 600 skulls. Tens of thousands total. Not as a monument to death, but in Aztec theology, a sacred place. A field of skulls from which life would spring again. The finest cuts of meat went to the nobility and to the warrior who captured you on the battlefield. And here's the final hunting detail. That warrior, your captor, your beloved father, well, he could not eat. Because to eat the flesh of his own captive would be spiritual self-cannibalism. Quite ironic, right? Because in the eyes of the gods, you were no longer enemies. You were a family bound by a shared, terrible duty. He had given you life on this world, only so your heart could live to the next. If you made it this far, subscribe. We've got a lot of more history to uncover.